The U.S. military has launched airstrikes on targets in Syria and Iraq. The Pentagon says more than 85 sites have been hit. Unverified videos are circulating on social media appear to show a weapons depot being hit in what's thought to be Iraq. The videos also show secondary detonations of missiles flying out of a site that's been struck. The United States strike is in response to the killing of 3 American soldiers in a drone attack on a base in Jordan last week. U.S. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says that the U.S. response will continue.
So the signal is to the IRGC and to these groups, the attacks have got to stop. This wasn't just a message sending routine tonight. This was about degrading capabilities, taking away capabilities by the IRGC and the militant groups. These responses began tonight. They're not going to end tonight.
For more, we can now speak to Rodger Shanahan. He's a military analyst and expert based in Sydney. Thanks very much for being with us. So, as we just mentioned, U.S. officials saying more than 85 sites were hit. What more can you tell us about these strikes?
Well, we're still working off the information that we've been given by the US government, but they said, as you said, 85 targets at 7 separate sites, so multiple targets at particular facilities, and they were designed to target command and control facilities, logistics support elements, weapons stockpiles, as you saw in the video there. And it was notable from the US announcement that it was designed to minimise possibility of civilian casualties. But also what wasn't mentioned in there is the fact that Jordanian aircraft also took part in this attack. So from what the US has said, this is the start of a campaign of retaliatory strikes.
And yet we should mention that the United States announced their plans to carry out these strikes ahead of time. So just how effective could they be? Wouldn't you think that there had been preparations for these U.S. strikes?
Oh, without a doubt. But I suppose there's probably 2 elements to that. To start with, we have to evaluate the effectiveness of the US strikes at the end of the campaign, not at the start of it. And it's obviously been telegraphed to some degree to minimise the possibility of civilian, but probably senior Iranian casualties as well. So there was, and the third element is there might be also other parts of the response, non-kinetic elements that we're not privy to that might have been targeting other elements. So I think we'll have to wait for a little while until we evaluate how effective they are in totality and not just based on the first night's response.
Well, it appears that at least one of the main targets was the Al-Quds force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Why was this group a target?
Well, the group that's claimed responsibility for the attack that killed the 3 US service personnel was the Islamic Army in Iraq, Resistance in Iraq, which is an umbrella organisation that includes a number of Shia militia groups who are supported logistically and in terms of training and financially by Iran, and in particular the IRGC Quds Force, which is the overseas wing of the Revolutionary Guard Corps. And so that's why these targets were selected. Washington has been quite careful in its justification for selecting targets to make sure there's a causal link between the attack that occurred in Jordan and the targets that they're selecting. So that's why these particular targets have been chosen in the first instance.
You mentioned that this is only the beginning of the U.S. response, and yet the U.S. government says it does not want a war with Iran. But how real is the threat of a serious escalation?
Yeah, listen, I mean, that's a good question, and it's a very difficult policy line to hold for Washington. You're going to have a campaign of responses that are targeting Iranian-affiliated organisations in Syria and Iraq, two other countries, and hoping that by ring-fencing your response geographically, that you're not going to trigger a direct response from Iran, which is why there's not going to be any kinetic strikes in Iran, so they don't want to widen the conflict. But Iran itself would have understood that the deaths of 3 US service personnel from this kind of attack can't go unanswered. So it's a very delicate dance that Washington is playing here, trying to have a substantive, multi-level, multi-day response against Iranian interests, Iranian-backed groups in the region, without triggering a wider response, particularly from Iran, but from other groups as well. It's a difficult policy outcome to achieve simultaneously.
That was Rodger Shanahan, military analyst and expert, joining us from Sydney. Thanks so much for all your insights.
My pleasure.